in your chair and please step out with the bailiff.
I have to just step down and step out while we address this one issue.
Yes. Let me have the witness step off the witness stand, please. If you'll just wait outside. All right, Mr. Lawrence Lewis, I will hear from you on the state's motion to have her tendered as an expert in, repeat that for me again?
Firearms and identification, and shell casing identification.
Firearms and shell casing identification?
I think it's a triage identification, that was the specific.
Well, tell me now specifically how you're seeking to tender her.
Shell casing, triage, and identification.
Nothing with firearms.
Well, firearms and triage, I thought you were asking me to clear up the last part. Firearms and shell casing, triage, and identification.
Okay, I'm not sure what that means.
I'm not sure what it means either, Judge, so that's what, I mean, listen, is she being presented as an expert to say shell casings come out of semi-automatic weapons? I don't have any objection to that. Is she going to identify that these shell casings were fired? I don't have any objection to that because there's a firing pin mark on the face plate, the whatever it's called, I forget, the head stamp. So I'm not quite sure what she's going to testify to, but I couch it in this terms. 2 witnesses ago, the person with the master's degree said the distance itself of shell casings is not pertinent.
Okay. Do you want to proffer her outside the presence of the jury? First of all, I don't know what it means to be an expert in shell casing, triage, and identification, so.
Neither do I, Judge.
So I'm gonna need.
I can clear that up, Your Honor.
Okay, through the witness, so. Let's bring the witness back in. Let me have Mr. Norris Lewis for the state clarify for the court more clearly how he seeks to tender the witness as an expert, and I'll let you, Mr. Lawrence Lewis, cross-examine her outside the presence of the jury, and then hopefully I will be prepared to rule.
That's fine, Judge.
All right, and before we resume the question, Christine, can you back up for me to the beginning? And let me just review.
To the beginning of the question that she,
About her background. Let me go back to that. Okay, keep going. Okay, a little bit more. Okay. She remains under oath. Let me have you clarify for the court, please, through questioning of how you seek to tender her as an expert, Mr. Norris Lewis.
You mentioned a firearms class, a course that you took in shell casing, triage, and identification given by ATF. What did they teach you in that class?
So it was 3 separate courses. The primary course was a triage course, which basically teaches you to identify class characteristics or overall characteristics of a head stamp of a casing, so that you can group them into groups that can then be examined by someone who is higher trained to determine whether or not those are likely to have been fired from the same weapon. After that, there's an acquisitions course, which is the process of entering those casings onto the NIBIN or the IBIS system. After that, there's a correlations course. That course is what I'm trained in all the others, but that one is the one that actually gives me the ability to compare casings. So that course, you are basically taught to take casings and they are run through the NIBIN system. You receive a, top however many options of casings that could be potential matches based on those class characteristics that were done way before. But then we actually have to, as correlators, go in and compare the individual striations that are left onto the head stamp by the firearm when the actual casing is ejected from the gun. And we're comparing those and saying, like, are these actually going to be leads? Are they going to be related? Now, after that, they get sent to a firearm examiner for confirmation, but we are not, that's done by the GBI. The ATF gives us the ability to make those leads without any oversight because of the training we've had.
So based on your training and your knowledge, are you able to compare 2 rounds that have been fired from a weapon and make at least a preliminary determination on whether or not they were fired from the same weapon?
Yes. A confirmation does have to occur after, but the preliminary I can do.
And are there characteristics that you observe on those fired shell casings that determine whether or not you make that determination that you're able to make?
Yes, there are characteristics on the actual shell casing that allow you to make that comparison.
And also, so I can be complete with this, are you familiar with semi-automatic handguns?
Yes.
How have you come to be familiar with semi-automatic handguns?
When we began our, firearms or our NIBIN unit, I was tasked with being the original person to assist in creating the system of test firing weapons and then entering those into an older system that we have. But through that, I was, consistently, weekly getting firearms from our evidence unit, having to take them to our firing range to be test fired, taking those casings and then entering them into our system. So, I handled, in my career, several hundreds, if not thousands of firearms.
Are you familiar with the 6-hour P365?
Yes, I actually had a case earlier this year with a P365.
Have you had occasion to test fire a 6-hour P365?
I believe so. I don't have the exact numbers, but, yes, that firearm was test fired in January this year.
Do you have any idea how many times it was test fired by you?
I do not. We typically do 2 test fires, but I don't have the numbers in front of me, so I can't say exactly.
Are you familiar with the type of the type of mark the firing pin from a 6-hour P365 typically leaves on a shell casing?
Typically, yes.
I don't have any other questions at this time, Your Honor.
Cross-examination by Lawrence Lewis.
I don't have any cross-examination questions, Judge. And again, I didn't want to interrupt Mr. Lewis. If preliminarily what she's going to say is the same firearm fired both shell casings, I'll stipulate to that. But I think it's a little bit more than that as I sat and listened, and I think that she may be testifying as an expert as to this specific weapon being the likely weapon that fired both of the shell casings. As it relates to the same firearm firing both shell casings, I'll stipulate to that. But it seems like she has some more, and I don't know that she needs to qualify as an expert to triage, but I don't have any objection, Judge.
So let me make sure I understand your argument. So are you withdrawing your objection to her being tendered as an expert as presented by the state?
I don't even know if it came out as an objection. I asked to take up something outside the presence of the jury because I didn't even understand I understand triage in a landing zone, military type situation. I didn't understand what she was testifying to. I don't have any objection in terms of what has been proffered, her being an expert to testify as to what what has been proffered, she's going to testify to. I don't have any objection.
All right, but what I don't want to do is bring the jury in and then she starts testifying to something that's not exactly what you think. So please proffer her so we can clarify that on any issue that you might object to.
I don't see me objecting to any issue that sounds like one gun fired both of these shell casings. I don't see me objecting to anything involving her expert opinion as to the weapon that fired these shell casings being this P blah, blah, blah gun. Anything else is going to have to come in my mind after this moment, but at this moment, I don't foresee me asking her any questions that would require me to challenge her expertise as the prosecutor has offered it to the court to this point. Thank you, Judge.
All right, I'll bring the jury in and I will have her so tendered as an expert as requested by the state. Are both sides ready?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, Your
All
Honor.
right, let's bring the jury in. So I'll need you to make your motion again when the jury comes in from the state.
Yes, Your Honor.
And I'll rule on it at that time, please. All right, I'll have the state resume its examination, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state would tender CSI Jimenez as an expert in firearms and in shell casing, triage, and identification.
No objection, Judge.
All right, hearing no objection, she will be so tendered.
Are you familiar with the operation of a semi-automatic handgun?
I am.
I guess, have you fired semi-automatic handguns before?
I have.
Have you fired a lot of semi-automatic handguns?
I have.
I have. I'm going to show you what's marked as State's Exhibit number 30, and I will fill in the numbers. What is State's Exhibit 30?
This is a USB containing videos showing the mechanical operation of a firearm when it is fired and the different components of a firearm.
Have you viewed those videos?
I have.
Would they assist you in explaining to the jury the complete function of a semi-automatic handgun?
They would provide a visual representation.
Your Honor, I would tender State's Exhibit 30 and the videos A, B, and C for demonstrative purposes.
I don't have any objection, Judge.
All right, is it narrated by this witness?
The videos do contain audio, but the audio will not be published to the jury, and I will allow CSI Jimenez to narrate the videos.
All right, so any exception to that, Mr. Lawrence Lewis?
Thank you, Judge.
All right, so that the record is clear, only the video portions of States 30, A, B, and C are being admitted for the record. No audio is admitted by the court.
There's a pointer right in front of you.
Yes.
This is State's Exhibit 30A.
Okay, so here we are just going to be going over some of the principal components of a firearm. So this is a semi-automatic handgun. The portion that's racked back to actually load the round into the chamber is called the slide. That's at the top of the firearm. All right, the grip module is just a portion of the actual handle that you're going to be using. This back portion is the tang. That's just going to be a rest against the, I guess, webbing area of your hand. And of course, everyone knows the trigger. The plastic piece around is the trigger guard to prevent any accidental misfires. The hammer, this is going to be the portion of the firearm that actually comes back when the trigger is pulled that will actually push the firing pin in. Now you have a rear sight and a front sight so that you can actually see what you're looking at when you're firing the weapon. A slide catch to keep that slide from moving and operating correctly. The grip panel is just the same portion of the handle that actually gives you some traction on it. The muzzle is where the projectile is going to eject. The accessory rail is for any lights or accessories that you want to add to your firearm. The front strap is just additional gripping so that you can have a good hold on the firearm. And then the magazine goes into the grip, and that's where the intact cartridges or bullets actually go. The magazine release ejects that from the firearm itself so you can load it. Then you have your take down lever up top. This is the magazine actually ejecting. And this is the inside view of that same firearm, showing the firing pin that I mentioned earlier that's controlled by the hammer, the barrel, which is where the actual bullet travels, the recoil guide rod that just actually makes the slide move back and forth, and the recoil spring is the spring around it. All right, so the magazine gets placed into the firearm here. So you can see the magazine body as well as the opening at the top that holds the intact cartridge. And that's just the intact cartridges as viewed from a side of the magazine. The spring at the base and the follower, those actually push the intact cartridges up towards the barrel of the gun.
State's Exhibit 30B.
Now, this video is going to show basically what I just narrated, but that cycle of the projectile actually being fired. So the intact cartridges in the magazine are being pushed up by the spring lever, and then they are going to be loaded into the barrel of the gun after each round is ejected. So you have a new round. Actually, let's let this one finish. This cartridge that at the very top that has been fired is going to eject out of the side port. A new one is going to go up into the barrel, and then as you pull the trigger, the hammer is going to make the firing pin actually hit the breech or the center fire cup of the cartridge, and that's what's going to ignite the gunpowder inside of the intact cartridge, which will propel the bullet down the barrel. After that happens, we saw midway through the video that the casing that the bullet is housed within is ejected out of the ejector port located on the side of the firearm. And then the cycle starts over again.
State's 30C.
And here we just have a better view of the firing process. So the magazine, you have a chamber or a round in the chamber, your hammer back at the back, Your firing pin is the cylindrical object with the spring around it, the cartridge, and then you have the barrel that it's going to be coming through. So this gray material, that is your gunpowder. You have the case, which is the gold or yellowish casing around the gunpowder, and then the bullet itself. So when the trigger is pulled, the firing pin is going to come back, and then it will hit the primer, which ignites the gunpowder, propels the projectile down the barrel. As we see here, you get an explosion of gases because that is a very small environment with a lot of combustible materials. So you have this gunpowder that's going to come out of the firearm at the barrel site and also out of the ejector port when the casing is ejected.
And does, and I've paused it at the 43-second mark. What we see is what looks like sparks and particulate and smoke coming out of the muzzle. Does that travel a certain distance and after it leaves the muzzle?
So it depends on conditions, of course, but typically if you have anything outside of like a 6 to 10 foot radius, you're not going to get a lot of visible markings. But really when you get like powder deposition on a surface, it has to be relatively close range.
Okay. Are you familiar with the Sig Sauer P365?
Yes,
Is it a semi-automatic handgun?
it is.
Does it operate in that fashion?
It does.
To show you what's marked as States Exhibit 31. What is States Exhibit 31?
This appears to be a replica of a semi-automatic handgun. It's about the same size as a P365. Now this appears to be for a Glock 43, but they are of similar size and their operation would be the same as this firearm.
And would that help you explain your expert testimony to a jury?
Yes, in relations to, the size of the firearm, or the size of a P365.
I would tender States Exhibit 31 for demonstrative purposes.
I don't have any objection to that, Judge.
All right, States 31 is admitted without objection.
Now, this replica weapon has what appears to be an ejection port on the right side. Is that typical of firearms?
It is pretty typical. You can have firearms that are left side ejecting, but usually it's going to be the right.
I guess are more firearms manufactured, as far as you know, that are right side ejecting versus left side ejecting?
Yes, that is correct. There are more that are right side ejecting.
A couple more, a lot more?
A lot more.
Now, you've test fired a number of firearms.
Yes.
About how many firearm test fires do you think you've conducted?
Personally, probably about 100 myself, but I have been present for thousands easily.
Okay. And obviously each semi-automatic firearm ejects a cartridge casing?
They should, yes.
Well, unless there's a malfunction.
Unless there's a malfunction, yes.
Now, describe what a malfunction means in the firing process of a semi-automatic handgun.
So you can have a malfunction where the barrel itself or where the slide doesn't completely rack back, and you might get, a stovepipe. Like say if you were to grab the slide while it's actively being fired, you could have the casing get stuck into the barrel so it doesn't fully eject. You may also just have some that don't eject because of the way that you handled it. But most of the time they should eject properly. Damage can contribute to a malfunction.
And is there a way to get that shell casing out if there is a malfunction?
Oftentimes, yes.
But sometimes no?
But sometimes no. Without taking the entire firearm apart.
Fair. I guess let's circle back to July 28th, 2021. Did you directly participate in the investigation of a homicide that occurred in Yellow River Park on the previous day?
I did.
What was your role in that investigation?
I was contacted by the supervisor on scene, Supervisor Brittany Barrington, and was requested to come to the scene to recover or to retrieve those fired cartridge casings that had been located by Specialist Musey or Hamill, and to take those back to our unit to be uploaded into our system for a comparison against each other.
Did you collect those shell casings from Musey?
I did.
To show you what's marked as State's Exhibit 21. What is State's Exhibit 21?
This is the package, and if I can see these. Yes, these are the 2 casings that I received at the scene from Specialist Musey.
And how do you know?
Well, we have a pretty thorough chain of custody also. So it has a placard showing the case number, where they were collected, but also just visually looking at them, they are the same mark, the same caliber, same color as the cartridges that I actually looked at.
And I will now show you State's Exhibit 24 through 29. You recognize State's Exhibits 24 through 29, and could you just describe each one for the jury?
Okay. I recognize the item in them, but the photographs are not mine. I believe these belong to Specialist Musey.
But are they, what is the item in them?
The item in them is going to be the 2 cartridge casings that I recovered from her at the scene. In fact, I can see the truck's lab bench in the background. And so this is going to be photographs of the 2 Aguila 9mm fired cartridge casings that I collected and entered.
Are they accurate depictions of the shell casings that were turned over to you and that are physically present in State's Exhibit 21?
They are.
Your Honor, State would tender State's Exhibits 24 through 29, a series of photographs of the aforementioned shell casings in State's Exhibit 21.
No objection, Judge.
All right, 24 through 29 are admitted without objection.
Show you what's admitted, maybe, as State's Exhibit 24. What is State's Exhibit 24?
This is a photograph of one of the 2 9mm shell casings that we were discussing previously, along with a note in Specialist Musey's handwriting, just designating this as evidence marker number 1.
So it's typical in CSI's lab amongst the analysts, investigators. Never know what to say.
Specialist.
That's not it. Never mind. Amongst the specialists, it's common to EM is evidence marker, and 1 is obviously 1.
That is correct.
And
That's the time that
09,
was
49
recovered.
hours,
That's
was
correct.
collected. And State's Exhibit 25.
If these are in order, this should be a side profile of that same first casing with a measuring device for scale.
State's Exhibit 26.
And this is going to be a top-down photograph of the head stamp showing that one of the 2 casings as Aguila 9mm.
And does it depict the firing pin stamp in the primer left by the weapon that fired it?
Yes, if you look inside of the centermost circle, you have a circular shape, which is going to be the firing pin impression. This portion right here is going to be the firing pin impression.
And what characteristics of that allow you to compare it to the mark made by, or let me rephrase that. What characteristics of that allow you to compare it to a mark left on a different shell casing?
So the shape of it as well as striations found within it. Now with head stamps, we're not just looking for firing pins, we will look for ejector marks as well. And ejector marks are found on this outer rim, and here is a clearly defined rectangular ejector mark, which will have individual striations in it as well that can be compared against another casing.
Skip out of order here and show you State's Exhibit 29. What is State's, or describe for the jury what's in State's Exhibit 29.
So this is another photograph of a head stamp of one of the two casings depicting that same circular shaped firing pin and also an ejector mark rectangular in fashion like the one we saw previously.
And in your opinion, based on your knowledge, training, and experience, can you tell whether or not these marks were left by the same weapon?
From these photographs, not 100%. I would need a microscopic image, but I did see them microscopically when they were uploaded, and they did appear to be from the same weapon.
And are you able to tell what type of weapon left that mark?
Unfortunately, no. I can't testify to what weapon it would have left it. Characteristics of the weapon, absolutely, but a firearms examiner would have to give that specific information.
Is it consistent with the characteristics of any weapon that you're familiar with?
Yes, it is consistent with a P365.
Just so it's complete, I will show you State's Exhibit 27. Describe for the jury what that is.
This is a photograph that was taken by Specialist Musey of the second fired cartridge casing with evidence marker number 2 written beside.
And lastly, State's Exhibit 28.
And this is going to be another photograph of one of the two casings, I'm assuming the second based on the sequence, just showing the scale of that casing.
And I guess you said striations on the side?
The striations on the side of the casing?
I might be misquoting you.
Yes, no, we don't do comparisons of any striations on the side. Now, there may be a portion of the extractor might leave a marking on the underside of the rim here, but I don't see that in this particular photo.
Okay. When you observed them microscopically, did you see anything about
We don't typically use those as the sole comparison.
But what you were able to observe was enough to conclude that they have the same characteristics as being fired from a P365?
Yes, I mean, they do have characteristics that would be consistent with that.
And whether or not irrespective of the weapon they were fired from, the two shell casings were left by the same weapon?
They do appear, yes, they do appear to be similar and that they look like they came from the same firearm.
Did you take part in any other part of the investigation of this particular homicide?
Yes, I processed a vehicle that was brought in relation to this case.
What condition was that vehicle in?
When it was received, it appeared to have severe charring and burn marks throughout and on the exterior of the vehicle. There was no visible tag. The VIN number had been essentially obliterated. The glass was melted into the car. It looked like it had been on fire for a good period of time.
Were you able to determine, I guess, where that vehicle came from, what kind of vehicle it was?
In terms of where it came from, that would be a question for the investigator or the officer that brought it in. However, we were able to identify a VIN number on the engine compartment of the vehicle that we were able to trace back to I believe a Nissan Versa, if I might reference my report.
You may, if it will refresh your recollection.
Yes. That was actually part of the detective's report, but it was a 4-door hatchback, and we were able to run the VIN numbers, but the actual make and model can be verified with the detective if necessary. But there was a Nissan emblem on the inside of the vehicle, and the VIN number 3N1BC1CP1CL364033 did return to a Nissan.
So it did return to a registered vehicle in the state?
It did.
As far as you know.
It did, as far as I know. I do not know the details of the registration, though.
Understood. Show you what's marked as State's Exhibit 32 through 37.
Thank you.
Can you describe what we're looking at in State's Exhibits 32 through 37?
Yes, these are photographs that I did take of the vehicle in its state when it was received by our crime scene investigations unit. We documented the exterior, we being myself. I documented the exterior of the vehicle, the interior, and we also sifted through the debris inside for any items of possible evidence.
Were you able to locate any items of possible evidentiary relevance?
We located a Nissan emblem, which was outside of the VIN, the only identifying information that we had at the time. We located that amongst the ash and debris in the floorboard in the front console area. We also located an aerosol can and I believe, red colored coffee cup that were underneath the seats. We weren't sure of their evidentiary value, but those were the things that we could identify in the vehicle.
And I'll go back to 32 through 37.
Yes.
Are those true and accurate depictions of the vehicle as it was in the evidence bay at Gwinnett County CSI?
Yes, they are.
Has anything been added to them, removed from them, they've been altered?
They don't appear to have been.
They're all true and accurate depictions?
Yes.
Stay with tender, State's Exhibits 32 through 37.
No objection, Judge.
All right, 32 through 37 are admitted without objection.
Show you what's marked as, or admitted as...
Are you asking to publish?
I am, Your Honor, I'm sorry.
You may publish.
Publishing State's Exhibit 32, which has been admitted. Can you describe for the jury what we're looking at?
Yes, this is a photograph from the rear driver's side window frame looking into the front cab of the vehicle. So here you are going to see what is left of the front driver's seat, front passenger seat, and then the dashboard components of the vehicle as well as the insides of the door. You can see that the glass has been melted into the car and most of the upholstery has been basically burnt to ash.
Showing you what's been admitted as State's Exhibit 33.
This is a side profile photograph of that same portion of the vehicle. Here you have the front passenger, here is the front driver, and then this is the windshield that is melted over the dash component. However, you can see that all that's left are metal frames and pieces of glass, and then all of the combustible materials have been turned to ash.
State's Exhibit 34. State's Exhibit 34.
This is a top-down photograph of the front driver's seat. Underneath, you can see the, I believe, red-colored cup that's located inside the vehicle. And then you just see a better view of some of the ash and material throughout.
State's Exhibit 35.
This is an overall photograph of the engine compartment of the vehicle, with the focus of it being here inside of the engine compartment. This steel impressed VIN plate is where we were able to find the VIN number to the vehicle. It was of course covered in ash, so it has been removed here, but the VIN number to the vehicle is impressed upon it.
State's Exhibit 36.
This is the back end of the vehicle, just showing the state of the exterior. All paint appears to have been burned off of the vehicle, and also there is no intact license plate or even bumper on the back of the vehicle. Or
Now, a license plate in the state of Georgia, do you know what it's made of?
a license plate, oh, I do not.
Do you know whether or not it's metal?
It is metal. It's, I'm assuming, an aluminum material, but I don't know the exact composition of it.
Based on your observations, did you find a charred or burned license plate?
No, there was nothing inside the vehicle that appeared to resemble a license plate.
Okay. Lastly, State's 37.
This is the front end of the vehicle, again showing that all of the plastic and rubberized components of the vehicle have been burned off.
A vehicle that is, well, let me ask you this. Did you check for the things did people think a CSI would go looking for DNA, fingerprints? Did you look for those things here?
So we did rifle through, myself and Supervisor Barrington. We went through the ash and debris to see if we could find anything that was not entirely burned, so that we could attempt to retrieve DNA or fingerprints. However, unfortunately, every item in there had a layer of soot on the outside. And when you have an item that has been burned, it takes away from the viability of getting fingerprints and DNA off of those items. When you think about fingerprints, fingerprints are mostly water. So if you think about, if you set a cup of water out on a table on a hot day, eventually it's going to evaporate. The same thing happens with fingerprints. Now, if you introduce a very large heat source or a fire, that's going to happen more quickly. So fingerprints in a fire situation are very difficult, if not impossible, to recover. And DNA is part of a combustible material, flesh, bone, those sorts of things. And unfortunately, fire degrades those pretty severely in most cases. So we weren't able to find anything that resembled fingerprints or DNA in our search.
And I guess it's fair to say, just based on observation, that this was a fairly hot fire?
That is safe to say.
Was there any other duties that you performed in relation to this investigation?
I received, I believe the following day, a bag that was recovered by Investigator Smith that contained an aluminum, what appeared to be license plate from another location. I don't know the location where it was recovered, that did appear to have burns on it as well.
When you say a license plate, do you mean like a vanity plate or a Georgia-issued registration license plate?
Both. So there was a Georgia-issued license plate that I wasn't able to like see anything on because it was just metal at that time. There was a plate, I guess the like plastic decals, like decorative plates that was around it, that I was able to get a name off of, like a brand name, but we weren't able to get any kind of tag number or anything like that because the way that license plates work, at least in Georgia, is the top layer is a foil because that's what makes it reflective when people are behind you with their headlights. And foil burns really easily. So that portion was gone, but the actual, I guess, body of the plate was still there.
Is it the foil that contains the identifiable numbering?
Yes, unfortunately.
I think that's all the questions I have. Thank you.
You cross-examination?
The demonstrative,
It's under the exhibit up here.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Good afternoon. Can I call you Investigator Jimenez?
That's fine.
Thank you very much. I don't have a lot of questions, but let me start with this one. You indicated that a lot more of the semi-automatic guns have a right side ejecting. Is that right?
That's correct.
Do we call it a right side ejection port?
It's a right side ejection port.
Fantastic. Okay. And a right side ejection port as opposed to a left side ejection port. Is that right?
That's correct.
And is that because most shooters are right-handed and the shell casing is going to be ejected away from them as opposed to left-handed, or do you know?
I don't know. I can't say to the design rationale.
I don't know is a fine answer. Stovepipe. Tell the jury what a stovepipe is.
So a stovepipe is basically when you go to fire a weapon, when the trigger is actually pulled. If for some reason the slide of the firearm is manipulated during that operation, so say that you grab the slide as it's actually racking back or as the trigger is being pulled, when it's going to stop that process of the cartridge casing being ejected midway through. So you'll get the cartridge casing halfway in the ejector, but caught in the gun. So it'll be sticking out. The stovepipe, I've heard, is referring to the way that it typically looks with it like sticking out like a chimney or something like that.
Okay, now that's a mouthful.
Yes.
I want to understand.
Of course.
I want you to tell me, don't let me tell you. Does stovepipe just mean that the fired cartridge casing does not eject out of the gun?
It means that it doesn't eject fully, so it'll be partially hanging out of the
Okay.
ejector port.
Does somebody have to touch the slide in order for that to happen?
It's not mandatory. That is the scenario where you see it most of the time because that directly interferes with the slide, opening all the way so that it can be ejected, but it can happen if there's a malfunction with the slide by itself.
All right, and it sounds like when there's a stovepipe, I'm gonna call it the back of the fired cartridge casing, which would be what's it called? The
head stamp?
head stamp. It sounds like the head stamp would be stuck in the gun while the hollow portion is facing out. Is that right?
So it kind of, oh gosh, I'm trying to demonstrate it. if you have the casings.
You're removing that from one exhibit, so we're clear.
Judge, this is State's Exhibit number 21. I just opened it. I haven't removed it because I think it's attached in here. It may just be attached with some tape though, so
Okay.
we may be able to remove it both from. I've removed one of the cartridge casings. It's marked EM number 1 from State's Exhibit number 21, and I'm going to ask for permission to remove the actual cartridge casing, the fire cartridge casing. This is what you need, right?
Yes,
Okay.
that
here we
and
go.
the
Fantastic.
replica.
I'll give you both of them. There you go.
I'll take that
Okay,
there.
sorry.
No, that's all right. Just have it, always wearing gloves. All right, so when you have a stovepipe, typically you are going to, just for the sake of the demonstration, you are going to have the cartridge casing and it's going to be partially ejected. So let me do it from, I'm trying to think of the best way to have this represented for you guys. You're going to have a portion of that cartridge sticking out, but the rest of it is going to still be inside of the firearm with this slide preventing it from exiting. So where it falls on this half of the cartridge casing, there's no way for that to be controlled. It can be, midway down. It could be even like on the very tail end so that, most of it's still in the firearm. Or it could be near this head stamp crimping where most of it is hanging out of the firearm.
And how do you clear it? Can you pick it out sometimes?
So you'll have to actually rack the slide back to have it open the rest of the way so that you can get this out.
All right, sometimes you can do it that way. If I understood your testimony, sometimes you'd have to take the slide apart. You have to take the gun apart?
Yes, you would have to take the firearm apart.
Okay. Let me use this since you had it. Since it's out, let me just use it for a second. Judge, and I have what's part of the exhibit. It was marked EM number 1. I have some questions about this. If the fired shell casing, right, is right here, can we tell if this is a Sig Sauer P365? Can we tell if the gun is in this position, or this position, or this position, based on where the round is?
No, shell casings and the whole process of a firearm being fired creates basically a controlled explosion, but it's only controlled in that the projectile is going to go down the barrel and so on. As far as the casing that is ejected from the firearm, you could shoot the same firearm from the same position multiple times and have them land in multiple different locations because it's just going to happen at random. It's going to go in the direction of the ejector port, so it's going to go to the right typically, but I have had guns that will, eject straight up, which, can be misleading, with the actual where the location of the ejector port is, but yeah, you can't tell where the gun 100% is based on it.
So if this were a Sig Sauer P365, I can fire 5 rounds. One might land at the judge. One might land over at the deputy by the door. One might land right here on the floor.
That's correct. And you also have external forces that could play a part of it, bouncing off of the ground, people walking through the scene potentially, moving them, things like that.
I'm just using an example right here. I think this is as controlled as you can get. There's no
Yes,
range
this
here.
situation of, you might have bounce on the ground, but
And if I fire this 5 times, one's gonna land at the judge, might land at the
Might.
judge. One might land up in the lighting fixture if it goes up. Is
yeah,
that
that's
right?
possible.
One might land over by the deputy. Is that right?
That's
One
possible.
might land behind me with the woman in the yellow.
Now, I mean, you distance might be a thing. I can't say like how far they will fly because you do have limitations on the explosion, but as far as directionality, yes, they can go multiple directions.
So it's almost impossible to predict from looking at where the shell casing is, where the gun was when the gun was fired. Is that fair to say?
You might be able to get a general, but you can't get an exact.
And when we say general, we know that if it's a right ejection port, the gun was somewhere to the right.
Yeah,
To the left of where the round is.
typically, yes.
Right, after that, we have no clue.
Personally, no.
Let me return this, Judge. Let me put this back together. Thank you. Investigator Jimenez, you testified that the rounds that you examined have the characteristic of a 6-hour P365. Is that right?
Yes, they are consistent.
Okay. And I'm just trying to get some sense. If you can tell me what other guns may have fired those 2 rounds.
Oh gosh, I can't give you an exhaustive list, but I mean, so those are consistent in that 6-hour typically has a circular firing pin. There are other firearms that have circular firing pins and similar ejector markings, but they're not going to be similar in their individual striations. But what we're doing is class characteristics. Class characteristics like firing pin will tell you that, or if you look at a 6-hour, then they're going to have circular, whereas like Glock will have a rectangular or D-shaped firing pin. So it's consistent with it. That doesn't mean that it's not consistent with other makes that have circular firing pins as well, but the individual specific striations are what are going to make it, those two linked together.
Okay, and what I heard you say is all 6 hours. Is that what you said? That's what I heard you say, but I'm not sure.
Oh,
you said that. All
many 6 hours. Yeah.
Okay, many. So when we say many, more than 50% of all the models of 6 hour is gonna have those characteristics. Is that right?
In terms of the firing pin itself, yes. Most manufacturers of firearms, they're going to have a design that they go with. So to reference Glocks again, they are exhaustively or exclusively going to use that same shaped firing pin of like a D shaped after a certain model because that is their trademark. So a lot of other firearm manufacturers do that same thing.
Do you know how many 6 hours fire a 9mm round?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Okay.
But 9mm is your most common caliber.
I got you, and I understand you to be saying that a Glock could not have fired these 2 rounds. Is that right?
Based on the characteristics that I saw, no.
And I don't know if Colt. Does Colt make a 9mm?
I mean, I believe so, but I don't know off the top of my head theirs. I'm less familiar with Colt.
Okay, and Remington?
Remington?
Yes. Make a 9mm?
Yeah, Remington makes 9mm.
Okay, and so I understand you to be saying in terms of 6 hours, the 2 fired cartridge casings that you examined have the characteristics of a 6 hour.
Yes.
Right. Irrespective of this, if it's a 365, 465, 165, it has the characteristics of a 6 hour that fires a 9mm. Is that right?
Yes.
How many other, I'm gonna call it manufacturers,
my goodness.
Remington, Colt, however many, Desert Eagle.
Right.
I'm not the gun guy. How many other brands of gun have that same characteristic?
Several. I can't give you a number just because there are many off-brands that obviously I wouldn't have an exhaustive knowledge about. You have Russian firearms and things like that that are also going to have circular firing pins, but we don't necessarily see them. But it is going to be several. The circular firing pin shape is common.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you, Judge.
All right, recross-examination.
Done, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. You can step down, please. Does anybody on the jury need a break, or shall I call the next witness? All right, let's call your next witness.